Now, unfortunately, we're not yet able to live amongst the stars and go up to space and experience true zero-G for ourselves. But that doesn't mean we can't bring some of the immersiveness of zero-G down to Earth through the use of virtual reality. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up a very simple zero-G effect so that way you're able to move around as though you were in space living amongst the stars on some sort of international space station. But before we go ahead and jump into that, if you enjoyed this video and want to see even more just like this one, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below. And with that, let's go and jump right into the video. So now I have the project open, let's go and get started here. So I'm going to start by opening up the content browser. I'm going to create a new folder here called Blueprints. This is just going to be because we're going to have a couple things here. I just want to make sure we have them nice and organized here. So I'm going to create a new blueprint class of type actor. And I'm just going to call this Gravity Cube. Maybe kind of a long name there, but the purpose of this cube that we're going to make right here is we're going to use this in order to actually grab and be able to move around our scene, since we need something to be able to grab and just kind of freely move around. So I'm going to use this for that. I'm going to go and assign a static mesh as our root component here, actually. Since we're not going to have any other components here, I just want to make sure that we're going to have our static mesh there. And I'm going to set our static mesh here to a 1M cube. Now, it's going to be a little bit big for really what we need, but I'm going to end up resizing it in the editor anyways, so it's not going to be too big of a deal. And then we don't need to do anything else to the static mesh as far as I'm aware, so we're going to go ahead and jump over here to the event graph real quick. Now we're not going to end up using these, but we're not really going to be putting any nodes or anything in here anyways, so I'm just going to go and leave that alone. What we will need is to add a variable here, and I'm just going to call this grabbing hand. And we're just going to give this a variable type of motion controller. And the reason for this is in our player that we're going to create, we'll actually end up setting our grabbing hand here, so that way we actually know what hand is currently grabbing our cube here. Now, there was one thing I did forget to add into our gravity cube here. So one variable that I did forget is you do want to add in a grab location. This is going to be a vector, and the reason for this is we actually need to keep track of where we originally grabbed the cube from, the exact location where we started from. This is going to allow for us to be able to move around while we're holding on to the cube. So we actually do want to make sure that we have grab location there, so that way we can actually use this in the player. This is also going to be set in the player, so I'm not going to worry too much about doing anything here. So just go and compile and save that, and we'll be all good there with the gravity cube. So now we have our grabbing hand set. Let's go ahead, jump back into our scene here. And I'm actually going to go and place a couple of these around the scene right now, just because it'll kind of make things a little bit easier later on. So let me real quick place a few around the scene. I'm actually going to end up scaling these down. I believe like 0.25 will do. And I'm just going to place a whole bunch around the scene. So I'll be right back here in a sec once I have these just all over the place. So I've now gone ahead and added in quite a few cubes here. This is probably way more than we'll actually end up needing. And I only left like the center open so that way we can spawn right there and still be able to grab on. So I'll probably end up removing a few of these before I actually go and start in VR, but this will give us a very rough starting point here. So I'm going to go ahead, jump into our content browser again. I'm going to go and right click here. And we're going to go and create our character now. So I'm going to call this 0G player is what I'm going to call this. Now we're actually going to use this instead of our VR pawn that you're probably more used to at this point, for a couple of reasons. So the main reason is that because we have a character movement here, this we can actually use in order to apply gravity, or in this case, no gravity. And we can also use this to apply velocity to our character, which will allow for us to move around a little bit more like we would expect to in a zero-G environment. So before we go ahead and attach our cameras and all that, I want to start by setting up our main player here. So starting with our capsule component, I actually want to scale down our capsule component. So I'm actually going to set this capsule radius to 1 and our capsule half height to 1. So I'm going to go and do that. And then I also want to come down here and I want to disable gravity on our capsule component. I do not want our capsule component to have any influence over the gravity that this player is going to have. So I'm going to go and leave that there. In our character movement, this is actually going to be pretty simple. We're just going to want to come up here to gravity scale and set this to 0. Because as I said, this is a 0G character, so we don't want gravity to affect this player. Now let's go ahead. I'm going to go and add in a couple of components. This is for this to set up for VR. So I'm going to attach a camera. And then I'm also going to go and attach 2 motion controller components. Motion controller left and motion controller right. Now you may have noticed I deliberately clicked on the capsule component to make sure that it got attached to that. Don't let these get attached to one another. It will start causing issues. Don't let them get attached to one another. If you do happen, just go and drag them up to the capsule components. That way it gets attached there. Now for the camera, we don't need to do anything here. For motion controller left and right, I'm going to go ahead and set a device model so that way you can actually see where our hands are. So I'm using an index, so I'm going to actually set this to a Vive pre-controller mesh. It just makes a little bit more sense to me. I'm used to seeing the Vive controller when I'm testing on index. If you're working with Oculus, there is actually an Oculus mesh. It's called Oculus controller mesh. However, you can actually see it's based off the older Oculus Touch controllers. So that's entirely up to you though. The device model doesn't really matter. This is just for our own sake. Now, finally for our motion controller right, I'm going to jump down here into our motion source. I'm going to set this to right, just make sure that that's tied to our right hand, and then we're all good to go here for our components. So now let's go and jump into our event graph, and we'll get set up here. So now that we're here in our event graph, there's a couple things that we'll want to do. So I'm going to start by actually removing this actor begin overlap. We won't need that, but we will need both our tick and our begin play. However, I'm going to come back to these. I want to do these at the end because I want to do some setup in our on our grabs first. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to go ahead and find our grab left and our grab right input action. Now you may have it labeled as something different. If you're using the default template, it should be called grab left and grab right. This is just going to be tied to our motion controller grabs. And I'm going to start with our grab left here. So I'm going to go and grab our motion controller left. Get that. And I'm going to do a sphere overlap actors. And this is going to be on pressed. Now our sphere position is going to be where our motion controller is. So I'm going to get world location of our motion controller left. Pass that into our sphere position. Our radius, I'm going to put it at 20. You may find that you want to have it at a different value. I find that 20 tends to be a pretty good starting point there. Our object type, I'm going to bring this down. I'm going to make an array for object types. And I'm going to set this to world dynamic. And we don't need to do anything else beyond this point here. So I'm going to come right here after we've done our overlap actors. I'm going to take our out actors and run it through a for each loop with a break. Now the break is just for my own sake, just in order to keep this tutorial a little bit simpler. What we're going to be doing is once we find a grab gravity cube, we're going to break out and we're just going to continue on using that specific cube there. So moving on here, we're going to take our array element. I'm going to cast to grab gravity cube. Our loop body is going to go right there into that execution node. And then assuming we succeed, as you can see, we have 2 execution nodes here, one if we succeed and one if we fail. So this will also kind of act as our check here to make sure that we're actually grabbing something that we need. Now after this cast, I want to store our grab gravity cube that we get here. So I'm going to promote this to variable. And I'm actually going to simplify this down. I'm just going to call this a grab cube here. There we go. And now we also need to be able to set our grabbing hand and our grab location. So we're going to set both of those. So we'll start with the grabbing hand. So I'm going to set grabbing hand here. And our grabbing hand is going to be, in this case, our left motion controller, since we're grabbing with our left hand here. So I'm going to get our motion controller left, pass that through. And then we're also going to want to set grab location. Our grab location is also going to be gathered by using our motion controller left. So I'm just going to take our motion controller left and I'm going to get world location there. And that's going to go into our grab location. Let me also simplify this down just a little bit, make it look a little bit nicer. There we go. And then once all this is done, we're going to take our end and we're going to bring this around to our break here. At this point, we've now found a cube that we want to grab onto, and we're now able to move around in our space, or we'll be able to once we finish our event graph here. So finally, we just need to move on to our released. Our release is actually going to be pretty simple. All we're going to do is take our grab cube. We're going to get that. We're going to check to first see if it is valid. There we go. That's going to be on released. And then assuming it is valid, we're going to take our grab gravity cube. We're going to first set grab hand back to null. That's on valid. I'm going to go and bring this down a little bit. There we go. And then we're also going to set our grab cube back to null as well. And then let me go and bring this down. And that's all that we need here for our grabbing for our left and our right hand. So I'm going to go and copy all this right here. And we're just going to make a couple quick modifications for our right hand. These will be fairly easy and quick changes that we're going to make. So I'm going to change our motion controller left for motion controller right. And then right here at the end, I'm just going to take our motion controller right and set that here at the end of our for each loop. And that takes care of all of our grabbing. So I'm actually going to go and comment this out because we're going to have quite a bit going on here. So I'm just going to comment this and say grabbing gravity cubes. There we go. And that's all we need to do here for our grabbing. So now we have the main chunk of our gravity player here. Now at this point we have basically set up so that way we can detect when we're ready to grab onto some sort of actor, in this case our grab gravity cubes that we set up here. Now we need to actually determine what we want to do while we're grabbing, as well as what we do once we finally let go of our grab gravity cube. In this case we're going to end up setting velocity so that way we can actually throw ourselves in a specific direction. So this is going to have quite a bit to it. I'm going to go and start with our begin play here. Our begin play is going to be quite simple. All I want to do is take a variable here, and I'm just going to call this current location. I think that'll be pretty simple. It's not fully accurate as to what this is, but I think it'll be pretty good for what we need here. So I'm going to go and take this. I'm going to set this in our begin play, and we're just going to get our actor location and pass that through here. Now, the reason for this is we want some sort of previous location. Now, if you're familiar with how to calculate velocity, if you're into physics or anything like that, you're probably familiar with this. Velocity is calculated as displacement over time. In this case, our time is going to be roughly 1 second. We're going to set that up down here in our tick, but we need a way to determine displacement. So for this, we're actually going to keep a rough location of where we are about a second prior to when we let go. So that way we always have some idea of what direction we're moving in. So this is going to kind of help out with that. This will give us a starting location to start out with. And then we're going to modify this location throughout the duration of our session. So now down here in our event tick, this is where most of our gravity stuff is going to be taking place. So I'm going to start by actually setting our current location on each tick. So I'm going to run a vinterp2, and we're going to pass through our delta seconds as delta time. Our current is going to be our current location. So I'm going to go and pass that through. And our target is going to be wherever our actor is currently. So I'm going to get the actor location and pass that through as our target. Now, I wanted to clarify right now, this isn't going to be a perfect, oh, I actually almost forgot to, our interp speed needs to be set to 1. Now, this isn't going to be a perfect example of where we are. This isn't going to be perfect. However, given that we're only looking for roughly a second back into where we were, and we're only looking for a very rough location as to where we were 1 second ago, this will give us a very rough estimate of where we were 1 second ago. And given that's only 1 second, it'll be close enough for what we need. So finally, I just need to set current location as well to our return value here. And that will give us a rough location as to where we were 1 second prior to letting go. And this will actually keep track of where we were as well. So that way, if we grab something and immediately let go, it will hopefully give us a pretty good rough direction as to where we need to go. And we don't have to wait a second or a fraction of a second or anything like that. Now, if you want, you can, of course, modify this. You will need to modify the formula that we use later on. And you can decrease this interpolation speed if you'd like. I'm going to keep it at 1 second, however, since I find it's pretty good for the most part. So now that we're getting a rough location as to where we were 1 second ago, now we're going to go and worry about what we're going to do when we're grabbing, and as well as once we initially release a grab cube. So I'm going to go and get our grab cube here. I'm going to drag this through, and first I want to check to see if this is valid. Now, the reason for this is actually going to be used to determine when we first release, as well as when we're currently holding on to a grab cube. So we're going to use this in order to actually keep track of all that. So once we have this, we're also going to need our grab location. Yep, grab location. And we're also going to need to get grabbing hand. And our grabbing hand, we're actually going to need to get the roll location of that hand as well. So that will be all that we need to grab here from our grab cube. Once we have this, we need to subtract our grab location and our roll location here. And then we're also going to get our actor location. So let me go and get that. And I'm going to add this onto that subtracted value. And this will determine where our actor should currently be. So I'm going to set actor location here. I'm going to set that to is valid. And our final value here is going into new location. And that will determine where our actor should be as we are grabbing the cube at the moment. So let me go and compile that real quick for a second. Now we need to determine what we do when it is not valid. On is not valid, we're actually going to run this through a do once. This will make sure that we are only setting the velocity a single time. Our set actor location is also going to reset this do once, since this will kind of act as a determining factor to determine when we initially release our grab cube. Let me go and bring this around so it looks a little bit neater. I also want to start this as closed. I found that sometimes it can be a bit of an issue if you don't start this off as closed. So I'm going to start that off closed there. So now we actually need to determine how we want to set our velocity once we finally let go of our grab cube. Now, if you're familiar with the velocity formula, you may actually kind of get what's going on here. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our current location, and I also want to get our actor's actual current location as well. So I'm going to go and take this. I'm going to subtract our current actor location by the current location variable that we have here. And then I also want to multiply this as well. The only reason for this is I found that for whatever reason, it seems to move really slow when you release just based off of this formula. Now this is the main part of our velocity that we're using. Like I said, it's displacement over time. And since our time is 1 second, then we don't need to worry about the division here. However, what I have found is that this doesn't produce a very great velocity. It tends to be a little bit slow. So I prefer to multiply this by a float value. Let me actually drag off here, float, 2-vector float. And I found 5 tends to be a pretty good place to start. To be honest, I don't think you should ever go above 10 here. If you want, you certainly can. That's entirely up to you. But I found 5 tends to be pretty good. It tends to give us a more accurate velocity for what we need. So that will kind of help us out there. And then finally, we just need to get our character movement, and we need to set velocity here. Our multiplied value will go into velocity, and this will all run on completed. And that will set our final velocity, and that will complete our gravity simulation here at the end. So now I'm going to go and compile and save. I'm going to come back here into our scene. Man, I forgot how many cubes we had there. I'm going to delete our player start because we're not going to end up using that player start. We're not using the VR pawn as I had stated. And I'm going to take our 0G player. I'm going to put that right roughly in the center. And here in details, I'm going to make sure that we are set to auto possess player, player 0, and auto receive input at player 0 as well. And so now I'm going to go and save this, and we'll go and run this in VR and see how this all goes. So I've now been playing with this for a second. I actually have quite a bit of fun playing around with 0G things in VR. But anyways, you can see now if I go ahead and grab onto a cube, you can see I'm now able to freely move myself around, and my motion controller stays in roughly, if not the exact same spot the entire time. And as I go ahead and grab onto a cube and throw myself in some other direction, you can see I kind of glide off in that particular direction. I'm trying not to throw myself too hard, just because it tends to, if I throw myself too hard, I'll go flying off, and then it's just kind of hard to grab onto anything else, and I'll just go flying off into the void. But yeah, so you can see I am now able to move around pretty freely, and everything works. Ooh, there we go. And with that, that's how we put together a very simple 0G effect that we can use in any VR game. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below. I also want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters, who you should see over here on the right hand side, as well as Casa, who made this really awesome modern art that you see right here behind me. And with that, I'll see you in the next reality.